Tom and I are introducing our speaker. It's Marv Gersten. He was sitting next to me, and he's the technology user group head, and he's going to, Marv is, I'm sorry, Tom is. Anyway, we're going to introduce Marv as our speaker. Here we go.
So Marv was going to be our tug speaker today, but because of the cancellation of the regular speaker, he got usurped to give his pitch to the whole audience. The heritage of it is that, I guess a month or two ago, Mitch Erickson gave us a talk about travel ain't what it used to be and all the problems that have arisen and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That inspired Marv to reinvestigate and look into the alternatives for funding highways and other infrastructures. So he's going to give us a status of where it's at, and then we hope to have a discussion of any ideas you guys have or how technology can help any of those things come to pass, because there are large issues. I mean, just for example, with the prevalence of electric cars, a gas tax doesn't affect them, and the gas tax is what funded our roads and highways and things of that sort. So there are alternatives, but there's problems also. So Marv will talk about that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Good morning, everybody. Mitch kind of inspired me to go a little further on this topic of what's happening in the decline of our travel infrastructure, transportation infrastructure. Well, my career was in highway and traffic engineering, and I spent a lot of time on highway design. And I made a lot of PowerPoint presentations, and this is the latest PowerPoint program, and I opened it up and I typed in the title, Highway Infrastructure Financing, Past, Present, Future. And I typed a new button that said Design, and the picture popped up. I didn't pick it, so there's artificial intelligence at work. Look at that, 3-level freeway to freeway interchange. I love it. Now, if you look at that picture, think about how much money is involved in that picture. Just construction costs, planning costs, right-of-way acquisition costs, and where do the funds come from? And that's the issue I want to talk about today. So, make it full screen? Oh, it is full screen, okay. So, what are the revenue mechanisms for state and highway transportation funding, highway funding? Well, it comes from gas fuel taxes, comes from registration fees, truck taxes, sales taxes. Now, if you look at the taxes, we're paying 18.4 cents a gallon in federal gas tax, and diesel is 24 cents a gallon. And the last time these federal taxes were raised, 1993. What about local revenues for local roads? Well, property taxes go into it, municipal bonds, you pay transit fares, all go into construction operation. Other sources, you have state and individual port authority, turnpike, toll road transportation authorities. How do they finance? Through tolls and through revenue bonds. Okay, but what are the problems? Well, the taxes haven't raised since 1997. Tax receipts, 56 to 22, 1.3 trillion. But the outlays are much higher, almost 1.5 trillion. And where is the gap? Where do we get the money? They're transferring it from general funds, which means that your income taxes are now being used to fill in the gap that the Highway Trust Fund has insufficient funds for. So what's going on? Well, fuel economy is a lot better. EVs are coming up. And with COVID, of course, there was a decline in driving. It's picked up, but there was a decline in driving, which means there was a decline in gas use and a decline in tax revenues. Okay, so what are the revenues? Well, let's raise the federal gas taxes. Well, what about an alternative vehicle miles of travel? And that's what we're going to get into today. Continuing transferring regular income tax funds, or tolling. Now, federal government doesn't build toll roads. Those are state and authority projects. But the federal government does not build toll roads. Okay, so what are the issues? Well, declines in fuel consumption, but if you raise the gas tax, you've got equity issues. Privacy, how do you detect vehicle miles traveled in individual vehicles? The budget offsets, if you're going to transfer income taxes from general fund to the highway trust fund, you've got to make up for that money somehow. And as I said, the federal government doesn't do toll projects. Okay, very interesting graphic that I found. The AASHTO, what does that stand for? The American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. These are the state chief transportation engineers, transportation secretaries of individual states. They all belong to this organization called the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. And they did this chart that showed optimality considerations for options, for federal revenue options. And the white circles are the existing revenues. If you go from one side of the graph to the other, as you go further towards the left and towards the downside, that's more optimal in the AASHTO opinion. And that yellow circle is potential revenue mechanisms. And the potential revenue mechanism that they like the most for producing the most revenue is vehicle miles of travel charges. So let's talk about that. Okay. If they compare what would happen if they raised the sales tax, diesel tax, if they raised that tax by 7.6%, they would raise about a little over $60 billion. This is their estimate. This is AASHTO's estimate for a 5-year, from 2015 to 2020. If they raise the gas tax, it's a federal gas tax, by almost 6%, they would raise another $156 billion. But if they charged a vehicle miles of travel fee, one penny per vehicle mile traveled on all roads by all cars, they would raise almost $176 billion. And for trucks, if they assessed a 4-cent vehicle mile travel on all roads by all trucks, they would raise $70 billion. So look at the difference in totals that would be raised either way. Okay, so let's compare sales tax. What are the pros? Well, a small percentage, 5 to 7% increase, would raise a large amount of revenues. However, fuel prices change. The revenues are unpredictable. Lots of public resistance, obviously, to increased gas taxes. And of course, EVs. What about a vehicle miles travel fee? Well, the pros you saw from the last slide, a much larger revenue yield, highly sustainable. It seems to be an appropriate way to charge for using roads and highways. But what are the cons? Obviously, political opposition, public opposition, lots of implementation costs, challenges. It's not a viable short-term option. Okay. So, the RAND Corporation did a study in 2009 assessing the path forward. What did they find? More efficient conventional and alternative fuel vehicles will diminish motor vehicle tax revenues, obviously. Fees based on vehicle miles travel could provide a more stable source of revenue. So what are the options? There are several options. Well, how do you design and implement a VMT charge to every user? And the trials, if you did some vehicle miles of travel trials, you might be able to resolve certain problems. Okay, assessing the path forward. The VMT, vehicle miles traveled, the options. Metering, odometer checks, part of your annual vehicle registration. You report it in your vehicle registration, you get a charge. or AVI devices in your vehicle, RFID tags, with overhead supporting roadway just like the toll roads do, which means there's electronic toll collection. You could do the same thing with vehicle mile travel charges, some kind of onboard units. That's the technology user group's discussion of what our possible technology means to do this is worth discussing after I finish my presentation. So there's other ways of doing it: registration, debit cards, automated billing, other things. The ENO Center for Transportation is a research agency that researches transportation. And they looked in July 2023 at the current status of state VMT fees. This is what's going on. There's a lot of research and pilot programs being conducted around the country. And there's pilot programs. There's the trials with limited participants and predetermined end dates. And there's two studies going on. One is RUC America. These are Western states and Hawaii are looking at this. And then on our side of the country, the Eastern Transportation Coalition, 17 states and the District of Columbia along Interstate 95. And since 2018, RUC, road user charges, MBUC, mileage-based user fees, being considered by many states, Connecticut, Maine, Virginia, and others. And they're looking at legislation to either study these fees or to impose them. So, the Eastern Coalition, our eastern states, they did and are doing 10 passenger vehicle pilots. They looked at 2,700 passenger vehicles in 14 states, and they did 3,000 public opinion surveys. And they also did some commercial pilot studies with over 500 trucks. And what they find? These are from the focus groups they conducted, public opinion surveys. Okay, one, the funding, transportation funding isn't viewed by the public as an urgent issue. I thought that was interesting. The electronic vehicle owners, they found them kind of supportive of mileage-based user fees. Maybe they feel it's more economical than electricity charges at the electric device. Drivers prefer to have choices of how to report their mileage. And of course, the trucking industry is essential to this. And what happens cross-state when you go from one state to the other? How do things change? How do you manage the charges? So, Maine. In Maine in 2019, they studied potential systems funding, including a voluntary vehicle miles pilot program. They studied it. In Virginia, these are 2020. Highway user fees were studied for electronic vehicles and on other highly or fuel-efficient vehicles with greater than 25 miles per gallon. And in Virginia also, instead of paying highway user fees, let's say an EVs, they had charged $109 annually. The owners may choose a voluntary fee based on their actual miles driven. So they divide 109 by the actual miles, and that's what they would pay per mile. And Connecticut, all commercial vehicles over 26,000 pounds from 2023 charge a user fee ranging from 2.5 to 17 cents a mile. Massachusetts has lots of pending legislation. A pilot study of alternatives to gas taxes. They study a study of feasibility of mileage-based fees. Establishing per mile rates for autonomous vehicles. New York, legislation was proposed, but it failed. It would have created a pilot system, but it failed. Tennessee, they'd established an infrastructure bank and looking at financing, nothing definite. Vermont also would direct drivers to report miles driven on their taxes. So, with that, what do you all think about this? questions, discussion. There's another great. I didn't pick that interchange out. It was AI. But look at it, the cost of that project, and how do you pay for it? So with that.
Could you come up if you'd like to ask questions? Is there anyone who wants the microphone back to them? Okay. Mar?
Less questions, more discussion. Mitch.
So 2-3 years ago, I actually did one of these units in my car. I had been doing some work with transportation people, and so somehow my name got on it. And the New Jersey DOT asked me if I wanted to participate. I said, sure. A little while later, I got an envelope in the mail, and there was a little device, maybe a little smaller than a 9-volt battery, and they had instructions. And basically, you reach underneath the dashboard to the left of the steering wheel, and you pull out this little pigtail, and you plug this device in. I think that this pigtail must be there. My car is a 2019. It's for when you take it into the shop and they plug the computer in. Well, anyway, it's just sitting there. So I just plugged it in, and I drove around on it for 3 months. You don't do a thing. You don't, and you get a statement in email periodically that says, you know, if you were being charged, this is what you would have been charged, as opposed to, you know, the gas tax. And so you can just see. And I think over the 3 months, it would have cost me a little less. The point is, it was a no muss, no fuss thing. And if we go this direction, of course, they'll install them in the cars automatically. To my knowledge, it didn't know where I drove. It just know when I drove. It was a no muss, no fuss thing in terms of just like when you go buy gasoline, you don't think about the tax that's in there. You know, it's just built in and buried deep, and you don't care. So it's an easy way for a driver to be, you know, assessed, and it's got to be a whole lot cheaper than building any kind of tolling infrastructure or whatever. Anyway, point being, I had a good experience with it. After the thing was done, they sent me a mailer. I threw the thing in there, and off it went. But you know, I could easily see a vehicle mile travel thing like that as a way to equitably charge everybody based on the miles they drive. Now, it does not take into account the fact that if you want to do social engineering, you may want to charge people more to drive in rush hour than at 3 in the morning, and other things like that. But that's just a real world experience. So we're supposed to ask questions. What do you think of that, Marv?
You know, that same type of device is being used with your insurance companies. You plug that in, and you keep it in there for 3 months. I did this with Liberty Mutual about 2 or 3 years ago. And based on how you drove, you got a discount on your insurance premium, your auto insurance premium. So, yeah. It tracked how I drove, the speed, stops, starts, acceleration, deceleration. It was a tracking device of how well I drove. And this was used by the insurance company to give me a variable, whatever discount my wife did the same thing, and hers was a little different. Her driving was a little different. So, yeah.
Does it know where you're going, forward or back? Does it know if you're visiting your girlfriend, all these things?
I don't know the answer to that.
Well, Marv, thanks a lot. I guess we have something to look forward to with vehicle miles traveled. What do you think the people in Wyoming and Montana are going to think about vehicle miles traveled? Not well. I got a car last year, and it probably doesn't need anything to get plugged in. They send me an email every couple of months and tell me what's going on with the car. But my point is about financing all this is keep it simple and enforce it. So unfortunately, sales tax or gasoline taxes are the way to go. And if you want to pick up the electric vehicles, there's a lot of plug-in points. So I go to the movie theater and there's 10 Tesla plug-in points. My supermarket, there's 2 plug-in points. So you tax them at the point of sale, just like you do with gasoline. It's simple. I'm in Los Angeles. My daughter's garage, there's Los Angeles, right? There's all kinds of plug-in points. And I went and looked at it, and it tells you how many kilowatts and how much money it's costing these people. By the way, the kilowatt cost in this garage was 30 cents a kilowatt. Yeah, some of you know what you pay in kilowatts. The average kilowatt cost in the US is about 10 to 15 cents. So, yeah. So pay at the pump or pay at the plug-in point.
Just keying off of Marv's comment about his wife's driving. This will be easy.
It was probably better than mine.
Yeah. Well, when I first arrived in town, my wife got a $50 speeding ticket. It was the best investment I ever made. Anyway, 2 things, Marv. One is, are public transportation funding intermingled with the data you cited? In other words, sometimes you hear these joint bills that include both funding for mass transit and highway. And the second question is congestion pricing. Now, congestion is a relative term. You know, it may not be congested in Burlington, Vermont, but quite frankly, it's a matter of interpretation. And how does that weigh in your scheme of revenues?
Well, a certain percentage of the federal gas tax is used and put into the transit funding. So whenever there's transit, federal transit aid for capital projects, a small percentage of that 18.4 cent per gallon federal gas tax goes to transit rather than highways. That's the answer to that. Congestion pricing, if you've been reading about what's going on with in New York City, probably this spring, the congestion pricing will start. And they already have put in overhead electronic receivers on north-south streets in the Lower East Side. And there was an article in the Times yesterday, or the day before, talking about the certain residents' organizations in the Lower East Side starting to protest it. But MTA, the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, is expecting a huge amount of money to fund its transit projects with those congestion pricing income. Now, New Jersey, I think still has lawsuits against them for travel across the river into the city because it's multiple tolls. You're paying tolls for Port Authority facilities, and on top of that, if you drive into Manhattan, you're going to be charged a congestion pricing toll. It's probably going to double the tolls we're paying now anytime we want to drive into Manhattan. So the impact of that is, one, more people will switch from their cars to transit. Well, transit, New Jersey Transit lately has been having troubles because the existing tunnels are not in great shape. So what are they going to do? Stop coming into New York and more people are going to stop working in Manhattan and work in New Jersey? Questions?
Could you explain to us in these plans how the money that's collected gets allocated. The point being that there are entities at different levels in this country that maintain different roads, you know. So if you collect the federal gas tax, presumably that's going into interstate highways because that's the federal jurisdiction. But what about the people who just fix the roads in your town? Does some of that money come down? You know, and if you measure the miles traveled, you know, it makes sense for the people who are using the resource to pay for it, right? You drive, you pay more. But most people are driving local roads. They're not driving highways. And so what's the equitable way to allocate all this money?
Well, we all know about the interstate system, but in addition to that, there's a federal aid highway system. So you have state highways, you have county highways, you have local roads. State highways that are on the federal aid urban or federal aid highway system receive a portion of, let's say there's a construction project, a widening of a state highway in any state around the country. And if it's on the federal aid highway system, it gets a certain percentage of the construction funding from federal. And it's allocated, so the federal taxes that go to Washington get sent back to the individual states, probably not in fair, in what certain people might think of as a fair reallocation or distribution back to the states from the money from which the money came from. And the same thing with county roads. Certain county roads are eligible for federal help, and the same with the local streets. But in most cases, projects on local streets, your town streets, are paid for mostly by your property taxes. Some are eligible for local federal help, and there are different allocation formulas for each.
I have a peripheral question. There's two parts to the equation. One is we've been talking about the revenue side, how to get more money. But the other side is spending part. A few years ago, I read somewhere that New Jersey has the highest cost of creating a road per mile in the country. And I was wondering, since you've been in the industry for many years, if that's still true, and if so, why is it always more expensive to create a mile of road in New Jersey versus the rest of the world? And maybe if we had some looking into that, we wouldn't need so much revenue.
Yeah, I always thought it was New York and the mafia-controlled construction industry. But I don't know the answer. I really wasn't aware that New Jersey's highway costs per mile were higher than elsewhere. And again, I'm not sure why, but I kind of think New York State is probably, or New York City is probably higher. Alan? Okay.
So I retired from Exxon. I do construction management. I keep track of costs of construction around the country and around the world. And part of the answer to this, why it's so expensive, is because most of the highway construction are probably union-based contractors. So they have to pay prevailing wages. So that's the first thing. And then with roads and things like that, there's probably overtime. There's probably a bit of corruption in there too. Surprise. So costs are basically higher. The other thing that's interesting about tunnel construction in Manhattan, see. New York has the highest cost per foot or per whatever to build a tunnel than anywhere in the world. Not only is it higher, but it's like 5 to 10 times higher. So, welcome to New York and New Jersey.
Talk to Elon Musk.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the devices that would be installed in the cars to track how much you're driving, and just thinking about all the YouTube videos that would pop up to show you how to defeat those. And so, one thing about the tax at the gas station, that's it's hard to avoid that. So, and the other thing we talked about, I heard him mention, was how about I like the idea of charging where you charge up if you're on the road, but I know Mark has a charger in his house, so a lot of people charge their cars in their house now. So the government want all those people somehow to report that? That seems a little bit unlikely.
Speaking of avoidance strategies, while I was driving here this morning, I heard a very relevant item on NPR News, and that was the New York authorities have reported that they have been using cameras to nail speeders in New York City. Presumably, they're automatically reading license plates, and there's of the people who are speeding and are caught in these cameras, a very high fraction of them are driving with bogus license plates. A high fraction. I think the number is like 20%, or maybe it was 12%, but it was very high. So we're going to have to improve our technology or something if we're going to use that method.
Yeah, that was another radio report that I heard this morning even, and it wasn't the speeders who were hiding their license plates, but these are toll evaders that are evading tolls in the Port Authority facilities and the Turnpike facilities to the tune of multiple millions and millions of dollars annually. So they're trying to figure out a way of assessing. There are individuals who have thousands and thousands of evasive toll charges against them that they're trying to track down. Big problem. But, we talk about the cost of tunnel building in New York. So one of the projects I worked on was the project that Christie canceled, which we used to call Access to the Region's Core. And that was the new tunnel under the Hudson into, quote, Macy's basement. And I worked on that for years. And the final estimate of construction costs at the time, and this is kind of the late 2000, close to 2010, when Christie canceled it, was about $9.5 billion. And he canceled it because he said, no, it's going to cost $11 or $12 billion, and New Jersey's going to be assessed with it. Well, the allocation of the financing for that $9-10 billion at the time was a third was the Port Authority, a third was New Jersey, and a third was federal government. And Christie canceled because he said that third is going to, forget it. Well, so he killed the project. They had already constructed the portal entrance in the Weehawken Palisades. It was built. If you took the train into Manhattan and you were about to get into the tunnel, you could see the new portals that were already constructed. Well, forget about it. So now, the cost of what's now called Gateway is up close to $30 billion. The project that we had worked on, the $9 to $12 billion project, would have been finished in 2020. So now it's $31 billion, and maybe it'll be finished by 2035. Construction financing.
First, a very quick observation. Someone mentioned get Elon Musk to build tunnels. He's already got a scheme for making long-distance tunnels. He could make one from, for example, mid-Long Island to upstate New York, or you name two spots and he could put a tunnel between them. My question is, are you aware of our automobiles being used in criminal investigations, FBI investigations, etc. Sees a car, check its computer, find out where and when it's been, and there's the proof. Stop you for speeding, plug into your pigtail, and say, okay, I was wrong. You weren't doing 60, you were doing 70. Do you know of any of that yet?
No, but that's the public concern about privacy with these kinds of devices, I think, and that's where the opposition is going to come from.
Are there any more questions? Any more questions? Of course, here we go.
On the issue of privacy in your car, we've already all voted. Okay? These know where you are. They've done studies. They did a study up in Morristown, and Verizon anonymized the data so that you couldn't track an individual, but you could see when people flowed this direction and that direction. And the funny thing was, there was a huge bump in moving phones right at 2 a.m. when the bars closed. Anyway, point being is, if they put the same technology in your cars you got here in terms of accelerometers and GPS and so forth, then they can do all the stuff we've been talking about. And it can be anonymized so that you personally are not, identified. Now, to Herb's issue of, can you go back and look in a car like you can look in a cell phone and find out where it was at 4 p.m. yesterday when the bank was robbed? Sure, it can be done. Now, how much you want to give away your privacy, I don't know. If you want true privacy, leave this home, go to a cave, and hang out there, and don't ever come out.
Yeah, about privacy, we're in a new era. What Mitch said about cell phones, of course, is true. And the cars themselves are reporting our movements. Recently made cars communicate, whether you like it or not. So that's the era we're in. It's not really possible to avoid it. About tunnels and why they're so expensive. Some years ago, it was a real eye-opener for me when I went to the New York City Transit Museum, which I highly recommend. It's a very good museum. It's actually built in a former subway station, and it's a wonderful place. If you go there, you'll see an exhibit which explains to you what makes tunneling so expensive, okay? If you tunnel under the streets of a modern city, you're not tunneling through soil or rock. You're tunneling through electric cables, sewage pipes, water pipes, gas pipes, telephone cables, and I don't know what else, okay? Every single one of those things has to be moved in order to make a tunnel. And then probably moved again when the tunnel is finished. That's why tunneling is so expensive. It has nothing to do with what Elon Musk can do. Yeah, he can drill a hole. His tunnels are luxury tunnels. They're not the kind of tunnels we need for transit. Tunneling is inherently very expensive when you do it in a city. So I just wanted to take note of that.
I really view the issue of privacy as a political issue. And, I think all of us experience this. I mean, take, for example, driving through any toll booth in the city or New Jersey and hitting traffic when you approach the toll. And the reason why you're hitting traffic is because people will not put the easy pass in their cars, specifically because they feel that's an invasion of their privacy. Now, privacy and politics are tied together now, and there's strong resistance to what people understand about their being possibly viewed. There's a lot of situations where none of us know how we're being viewed. I think, it used to be on the news that they would report crime. Now you see the crime as it's occurring. So there's a lot of surveillance that's going on. But just think about people who are willing to wait in line a half an hour sometimes to pay a toll rather than going through Easy Pass. So you see the resistance there. Second, Marv, and we all know this, in the 1950s, under the Eisenhower administration, a federal highway system was developed, and really nothing has been done since then, in a large scale, so far as I know, and I know nothing on this subject, okay? But I mean, how was that? Of course, it's a different time, but how were we able to accomplish that? What has impeded the ability to do it again? And is it just, cost or politics?
So Eisenhower came back to Germany, and he loved the Autobahns, and he said, we need to do something similar in the United States. And he got one of his generals, I'm trying to remember his name, and they laid out the interstate system. It was 56,000 miles, I think, at the time. That intrigued me. That got me all excited and got me involved to go into highway engineering. And from the late 50s through the 60s and 70s, you could build these interstate roads by destroying urban neighborhoods, by blasting through, by doing what Moses did to the Bronx, etc. And then in the 70s, there was an Environmental Impact Act that was passed that said you have to do environmental studies to justify your location. You have to be very careful about where you place things. So that started putting limits on locations and characteristics of these highways. But so since then, right-of-way costs have increased, environmental costs have increased, so things are scaled down to, if it was started now, if that interstate system was started now, it would look a lot different than it was when it was built the first time around. Just think of some of the, in the infrastructure law that Biden passed, they are looking at ways of tearing down certain sections of interstate roads that went through and separated black neighborhoods and did all kinds of destructive things. So it couldn't have been done the same way today as when it originally was planned and constructed.
So there are some occasional bright spots in the construction of major projects. Do you know the story of the replacement of the Tappan Zee?
You tell it, Alan.
Yeah, the bridge. So the Tappan Zee is up north. Has anybody been over the new one, the replacement? Good, good. Okay, they got both spans up now. Remember the old one? Do you recall how quickly those double spans went up, right? Okay, so the story is with a major construction project, you design it, you put it out for bid, you compare the bids, and you award it, and you do an environmental study. So the state of New York, was it the state of New York that did that?
Well, it's Thruway Authority.
Thruway Authority? Okay, so what they did was, with some major projects in the country and overseas is it's called a design-build contract. What it involves is companies, no design from the state of New York. They say to these companies, tell us what kind of bridge you would install, design it, and install it. You do the whole thing from beginning to end. And to suffice it to say, that bridge went up in record times. And the other thing that they got was they got incentives for finishing it early. So that was money in their pocket. And it's, my neighbor went across it about 4 times a day, and he says that thing is going gangbusters. So that, and it was cheaper, faster. They thought it was going to take 15 years to replace that bridge. And it was done, how many years? 3, 4, 5? So there's an occasional bright spot.
So do any of you remember a presentation by a colleague of mine, Rich Schrader? Rich Schrader was COO of Parsons Brinkerhoff, and then he left and became the chief engineer of American Bridge, which built the new Tappan Zee Bridge on a design-build effort. And the design-build was based on an estimated cost not to exceed $3.5 billion. Well, you know, Murphy's Law is always there. So this Thruway Authority kept adding design changes and changes to that contract, and American Bridge went through a lawsuit for additional money at the completion. So it wasn't a clean job. Yes, they finished it on time. They never would have gotten it complete under the Pataki administration. It was the next administration that got it built. Pataki would never have been finished under a design bid build versus design build. So, or a PT, public-private partnership type of operation. So yeah, the procedure saved time, but I'm not sure what the outcome of that American Bridge lawsuit was, but I'm sure they got a little more money for the extra costs.
How are we doing? Well, why don't you come up? If there are no more questions.
Well, Marv, we would have had a certificate ready for you if we'd known you were giving this very excellent presentation. And we want to give a stand-up salute to Marv Gersten.
Thank you. Thank you.